we think about illness and what can we do to get better. And in traditional Chinese medicine and the more Eastern approach, they tend to focus on wellness. The body naturally is communicating all the time. For the session, a balance. That is its purpose. It's what can we do to help?
These are the great questions.
These are the great.
Yeah, so would you explain to the viewers, because some of them may have never ever heard of what kinesiology is, so just give them a brief overview of like what a session would entail. What do you mean by that?
Okay. Firstly, very briefly, kinesiology literally means the study of movement, and its evolution as a modality of one of the many great modalities that are out there is it actually came from a chiropractor called Dr. George Goodhart, who was based, I think, in Detroit in Michigan. And he'd been working with people's bodies for a long time and come across this phenomenon of muscle testing, muscle monitoring, to actually look at how energy seemed to move its way around the body. Now, when he used it and then he taught other chiropractors, other medical professionals to help use it as a tool to help when they're working with a client in order to, help them rehabilitate themselves to any particular way. The thing is this technology, applied kinesiology that he created, was only limited to medical practitioners. So one of his very first students, a guy by the name of Dr. John Thie, who was a chiropractor as well, managed to persuade George, could he maybe look at simplifying the whole process of applied kinesiology and doing it in such a way where they developed almost like the model that could be applied to many more people. So normal lay people like you and I and many people watching could maybe learn some of these skills and techniques so they could work on them for themselves. They could work on them to maybe work with those nearest and closest to them, their friends and family. And then maybe in due course, with its evolution, that other people can combine it with other things that they do there already. So John put together a synopsis of exactly what it was he was going to do. He turned that into the Touch for Health synthesis, which was actually published 51 years ago, 1973. And this then became something that John, and he was based in the west coast of California, he started teaching to other lay people. The Touch for Health kinesiology synthesis then became the basis of all other kinesiologies, or what we call specialized kinesiologies, and there are many. I couldn't even repeat how many there are, but there's at least sort of 16 or 17, but even I don't know their names. Where all of them, the thing that is in common to all of them is they use muscle monitoring to help with a particular part of getting biofeedback from a person's body. So if somebody comes to see me and we use kinesiology, first and foremost, just to reassure people, you remain fully clothed. There are kinesiologists who work with people laying flat on a massage table, and I have that. And yet it was developed to be working with people where you remain upright. So you can stand for this. For those who have physical disabilities, we can still do many things in the seating position, or we can even work through other people using a process called surrogacy. The thing is, though, and the reason why John said it would be good to be able to test a lot of this stuff with people standing up is, firstly, we're dealing with a number of forces that are acting upon us. The biggest one is gravity. How does our body even deal with gravity? You and I know, and again, people watching might recognize from time to time that parts of their body ache, maybe their shoulders, their arms, their legs, and it could be that they've done a really heavy duty workout at the gym or had a great run, or they've just injured themselves doing something, and the body naturally makes adjustments to almost like balance out the effects that we seem to have done for ourselves. And yet when the body's particularly stressed, it makes that process of rebalancing how the muscles work with each other an awful lot easier. So if we can deal with gravity, that's one thing. But sometimes when I even get someone to stand up and I just look at them and just sort of see, well, how straight are they? If you turn them around by 90 degrees, again, how straight are they? If they put their hands out in front of them, do they meet at exactly the same point? Is there a twist in their shoulders? Is there a twist in their pelvis? Now, these are very natural things that happen as the body adjusts over the course of the day.
So this part is very much like a chiropractor would. When you go to see a chiropractor, they would stand and look at you.
There you go. Well, this is the thing, and effectively, what John had worked on with George's work initially is that chiropractic is very strong in terms of how the body is sort of like laced together through the bones that we have, the tendons, the ligaments, the musculature, and how it therefore has an ability to move. And a body's ability to move is a relationship between a muscle that was called what we call facilitated, or it moves easily, or it's inhibited, it's prevented from moving. So whenever we move, there's at least a pair of muscles. One is contracting and one is extending at exactly the same time, so that we move until such times as we move it back in the opposite direction, where the other muscle is extended and the other muscle is contracted. So that natural movement is happening. The thing was, and what John recognized was, there's a lot to learn from traditional Chinese medicine. And I know it's a vast, vast field to begin to look at. And he was particularly drawn towards the 5-phase or the 5-element theory of how energy moved around, what was known as the Shen cycle. And this, as heavily practiced in traditional Chinese medicine, and forms very much the basis of acupuncture. So if ever any of you have ever spent some time with an acupuncturist, and they'll hold some points on your wrist, what we call pulse points, and they will gain biofeedback from the body would give them certain pieces of information to help them identify where in the body to maybe insert a needle or a number of different needles to help the flow of energy, the flow of qi around the body. But of course, also there's a number of things that we can do to look at what can we do to keep these sorts of things going. There's also a fusion of Western ideas and Eastern ideas. So Western ideas, we think about illness and what can we do to get better. And in traditional Chinese medicine and the more Eastern approach, they tend to focus on wellness. Here's the yin and the yang again. So there's a little bit of both going on there. So learning through how energy moved, how an acupuncturist may well use it, or a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, we looked at the flow of energy, and from the muscle monitors of different muscles in the body that correspond to the different meridians an acupuncturist used, and therefore the organs attached to them, we could look at the pattern of how energy moved on a particular person's basis. So if somebody comes to see me, they keep their clothes on, they're upright. We'll talk about a few things beforehand, because as you and I know also with NLP, a lot of stress is manifested in voice tone in terms of how people are able to talk and find information freely, but also move freely. And all of that goes into helping us work out what is it that we need to do. Setting up things called a muscle test or a muscle monitor to gain biofeedback about what it is that we need to do. What's really useful about it is that I'm well trained in it. I teach it as well. Anybody that learns Touch for Health, they're not expected to remember it. They even have, in fact, I've got one here. They even get given, when they learn, they get given a manual. This is a Touch for Health manual. All the information required, anything that you need, is in here already. It's already there. You're not expected to go along and remember it. And yet using a muscle monitor or a number of different muscle monitors, the person's body that we're working with will give enough biofeedback to work out what it is that we need to do to help the body get energy back into the right place. So I don't change anybody using kinesiology. Same with NLP, hypnosis. I don't change anybody. They change themselves. It is very facilitative. So our role is to, what can we do to go along and help someone get energy into the right place? And it works very much on a self-responsibility model.
Okay, so could you just explain again, for anyone who's not been involved in anything like this before, what you mean by a muscle monitor. Is it like a yes/no response from the body?
It is a yes/no response from the body. The thing is there are certain muscles and certain muscle groups that will give biofeedback about, like I said before, particular meridians. But if you're familiar, Adrian, I know you are, with a yes/no response, some people look at, standing there and asking their body to show them yes, and maybe they sway forwards or backwards or side to side, and then ask for the opposite response. The body naturally is communicating all the time. With kinesiology, you can't self-test. You have to have someone else to go along and do that for you. But also, the person who is doing the testing for you isn't influencing you in any particular way. They don't know you. Even if you could be balancing a friend, but they don't know what's going on inside. But effectively, when we initially set up the muscle test, the muscle monitor, we're just seeking to find out if, when put into a particular point where a muscle is put into contraction. So a muscle job is to do one thing, and that's to pull. So if we put it into contraction, can it tolerate a small amount of pressure pushed on it? Now, we say in Touch for Health, it's 2 pounds of pressure. So that's about 1 kilogram of pressure. So it's not a huge amount of pressure. But when you push against the muscle that's in contraction and you try to extend it, but you use no more than 1 kilogram of pressure, and yet it holds it, it's effortless to hold it there, we say that muscle is locked. It's not actually locked with a key, but it means that it can tolerate that. If there is something stressing the body in whatever context, because the context will change all the time, but if there's something stressing the body and it can't deal with 1 kilogram of pressure, then we will say that the muscle is unlocked. And it bears no relationship to the strength of the muscle, because we recognize we have some very, very strong muscles, as well as some muscles that don't have that strength ability. But the ability to be able to hold 1 kilogram, 2 pounds of weight of pressure for 2 seconds, moving no more than 2 inches, so that's 5 centimeters of new money, of movement. If it can't hold it within that range, we say that the muscle is unlocked. And for that circuit, if you like, within the body, is suggesting that there's a little bit of an imbalance. Now, we can talk about the technicals of it, and yet maybe a metaphor is coming to mind, actually, Adrian, that might well be useful to describe to people. Now, again, already, like I say, we're in the Northern Hemisphere, we're in the United Kingdom. It's cold at this time of year. We have central heating systems. As I'm talking to you at the moment, in front of me, I can see a couple of radiators that radiate heat from water that is heated, that then shares that heat into the room. And it's not just shared into this room, because we have radiators in other rooms. We have underfloor heating in a couple of rooms as well. But it's all on this one, circuit that's filled with water that's been heated up by a boiler, and then the heated water is then pumped around the system by a pump. So there's a boiler, there's a pump, and there's the radiators. In practice, from time to time, radiators sometimes acquire an airlock. Now, it could only be a small amount of air, but that small amount of air affects one particular radiator. So if you were to touch it by hand, part of the radiator would be really hot. And then when you move your hand to another part of the radiator, it would feel cool. Now, that would suggest that radiator isn't full of water, because in order for it to work, it needs to be full of water, which means that somehow air has got into the system. It's quite normal. Air does get into the system. So when air gets into the system, if I'm a plumber, I identify the radiator where it seems to have an airlock. We get a radiator key. We turn it. We undo the radiator key, a turn, a little, quarter of a turn, half a turn. It will hiss as the air comes out of the system, as the water drives it out. A bit of gunk will probably come out with it too. And then when we know that it's full, a bit of water will come, and then we seal it shut again. And normally then within seconds, that radiator then is full of hot water again. But what we hadn't even considered is that an airlock, we're thinking about one radiator, but an airlock in one radiator affects the other radiator in this room that I'm talking to you from, So if it affects that, it therefore affects the rest of the system, and it affects the pump in terms of how it pumps it around the system, and it affects the boiler, which effectively means they're not working at peak potential, they're working erratically. So one airlock is actually compromising the whole system. Now, with touch health kinesiology, we don't have airlocks, at least I don't think we do. We have emotional blocks from time to time. We have physical blocks because we've injured ourselves. We have physiological blocks because, going back to talking about briefly about digestion earlier on, we might have eaten something that's just disagreed with us that day. Those literal blocks or preventions of our energy working well prevent our body from working well consistently. So my job then as a kinesiologist with my kinesiology invisible hat on is to be able to say, what can we do to work with someone to metaphorically chase the blockage, the airlock, which won't be the case, chase it out of the system so the system goes back to doing what it's actually deemed to go along and do. Because the wonderful thing about the human body is, and we don't quite know how it works like this, the body knows what to do. If you were to cut your finger or thumb on some paper, for example, and I know we don't use so much paper nowadays because it's a lot of it's virtual, but if we, I've done it many times. You recognize, you look at it, initially you don't notice it, but you look at it and then it begins to hurt, and then the body goes, right, I know what to do. And quite apart from the running it under a tap and putting some water on it, and maybe putting a band-aid on it or something like that, we probably don't need to do that because the body knows what to do. It knows to thicken the blood, release, I think it's fibrinogen, and that natural clotting process happens. And normally within a day or so, that's healed up. You probably don't notice it. How does it know to start that healing process? How does it know to stop that healing process? We just don't know. It heals that hole, but it doesn't heal my nostril or my ear holes or my mouth.
These are the great questions.
These are the great questions.
These are the questions I
can't help you with those. Yeah, exactly. Mark might know, but greater people than I would know questions, the answer to those sorts of questions. So what we're doing is that we've chased this air out of the system, and then we're just making sure that actually all the systems within the systems are working well. I sometimes say, we've used the plumber as a metaphor, moving water around the system. In a similar way, maybe we're like electricians as well. So, those little screwdrivers that you can have where you just test against, just to make sure, is this got power going to it or not, to ensure that you don't get electrocuted. And you just create a little circuit in there, push against the end of it, and the light comes on. You go, okay, that's live. We need to be aware of that. So in a similar way, using the muscle monitors, we're actually just testing against each circuit, going, is this doing what it needs to go along and do? And if it isn't, rather than going into the whys and the wherefores and analysis and whether it's been affected because of your childhood or anything else like that, we just look at, well, what can we do to go and find where balance is for you at that point in time? Is that something physical we can do? And it could be, in our case with kinesiology, it might well be touch massage in a particular part of the body. It'll be very, very precise. It could be holding some acupressure holding points. So these points, an acupuncturist put a needle in, acupressure, a practitioner will just hold points, and we might do that. There are points on the spine where we have things called spinal reflexes, where when stimulated, it resets part of the system in a particular way. We can trace the lines of the meridians that an acupuncturist might well use. We could rub the origin and the insertion points of muscles that we're actually going along and testing. We can look at the importance of water and hydration, which I know I alluded to earlier on, because more often than not, people are quite dehydrated. And a number of other things. But with that, and maybe doing some other things too, we can then help that person, help their body to reset itself so it knows approximately where balance is. Because the great thing is about the brain, as we know from our NLP training as well, is, it's actually the only organ that you can set a direction for. But if you don't set a direction for it, it will do what it thinks is right, or other people will set a direction. Because this is a self-responsibility model. People have got to take responsibility to get in contact. That's one thing. Take responsibility for getting here. That's another thing. And then when we do the muscle monitors, take responsibility to deal with gravity and general inertia as we move around in any case. And then think, okay, what do I need to do differently? It might well be one, drink more water, very likely. It could be that certain foods that I'm eating are lowering my energy level, which very much could be the case. Or it could also be, oh, hang on, there's a project that I'm working on, and somehow at the moment it's maybe overwhelming for me. Now, we sometimes might use a bit of NLP to help people out with that as well. Or it might well be, oh, actually, I need to talk to a colleague about this because there's some input I could get from them, or I need to explain how I'm feeling about that, because it's not just a problem aired as a problem halved. It might well be that there is something that we're not aware of, and it's actually creating stress in the body again. So it's when the person leaves, they feel empowered because they've got some skills and some maybe things that they can do for themselves that they can put into practice before they may choose to come back again. Sometimes the body will indicate to come back again. It doesn't always, but sometimes people will then sort of go, do you know what? I think I need to just come back because I think my body knew where balance was, where my direction was, and now things are happening. You know, I've been dealing with the after effects. I mean, say, for example, unfortunately, before Christmas, my mother died. Now, we knew she was going to die. It still was difficult with her dying. But we know the effect that grief has on the body, and actually how long it can take. And again, you'll appreciate that, Adrian, as well. And other things that go on, where you've been promoted into a job, but suddenly you realise, it's really, really big, or maybe you've been unfortunate where your role has been made redundant, or the company you've been working for has ceased to exist, or you've been transferred to another company, or you become a new parent, or any number of things can affect that natural balance. And in fact, the thing is about a kinesiology session, we call the session a balance. That is its purpose, is what can we do to find balance? And this is what I do when people come and see me to have a kinesiology session.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. That sounds like a very good place to bring this to a halt today. So thanks very much for that. And as we said at the start, we're going to have a bit of a series of this. So the series is all to do with energy. It's all to do with making sure you've got enough energy to be able to carry out your tasks in the best, most efficient manner. So thanks very much for that, Geoff, and we will catch up with you soon.
You're very welcome.